Begin reading in verse 6, and our text is 7 through 9. As it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. For he finds fault with them when he says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord." This is part of the longer quotation from Jeremiah chapter 31. And I chose to stop here because this is a full stop. As you can see in the text, we are here speaking about the Old Covenant and talking about the true reason, the ultimate reason why this covenant was doomed to fail. And then next week on Easter Sunday, we will continue with the rest of the text that introduces the nature of the new covenant and explains why exactly it is superior, why it is better. How many of you have read Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher? How many? Yeah. Well, if you haven't read it, I am sure that you've heard of it in some way. These kinds of tales usually are known, and they linger in the subconsciousness of Western minds. The Fall of the House of Usher is a truly classic Gothic tale of doom. The nameless narrator on horseback approaches the remote and lonely estate of Usher on a very cold, blustery, and extremely dark autumn day with growing shadows setting the stage. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. That sense of insufferable gloom, that atmospheric sense of decay, settles on the story and comes to a climax toward the end. And it is both appalling and alarming and fascinating, and you can't put the book down once you start reading it. Even the opening words that I read there, they are so ominous. Most people are triggered into, I gotta continue, I gotta read where this is coming to. As the only remaining members of the house of Usher, siblings Roderick and Madeline live a life of utter isolation on an estate as sick as they appear to be, an omen of their imminent doom. As the building suffers from an incurable crack in its foundation, as the narrator notes early on in the story. So the short story chronicles the narrator's visit of his childhood friend Roderick, who had asked him to come, leaving the reason for his coming open. So he comes, and he barely recognizes Roderick, a shadow of his former self, in his state of mental derangement. Whereas his sister Madeline, pale as death, wanders through the halls and corridors of this old house in a state of fatal sickliness. Poe weaves his tale masterfully with its yarn of permeant, abysmal melancholy and sadness, and the growing sense of inevitable decline, to which Roderick and Madeline are resigned. And the author has the narrator try to cheer them up. Hey, let's go for a walk. Let's go for a ride. And you who read the story, you want to shake them and rouse them from their stupor, but they are beyond the reach of any appeal. And the fall of the house of Usher is complete. The house collapses into the lake in front of the mansion. It completely disappears. And so becomes the grave of both brother and sister. I take liberty, and don't think I don't know it. I take liberty in drawing a line between this story and the history of the Old Covenant. But the parallel holds true in one respect. The fall of the house of Usher is like the fall of the house of Israel, in that Israel's history under the Old Covenant breathes the same air of inexorable decay or decline that also pervades Poe's short story. And haven't we seen this already in the epistle to the Hebrews? An epistle that claims that the Old Covenant always came with an expiration date. You could see its end even at the beginning. And the author claims that it was doomed from the beginning. Doomed to be replaced by something better, something lasting. It could not continue. And so far we learned that this Old Covenant contained copies and shadows of heavenly things, but not the substance itself. And to be sure, it revealed God, and it revealed the gospel, and there was glory in it. But it was still not what God intended. Not the fullness of what God intended. We've learned that the priesthood, that the service of the priests fell short of building a lasting and complete bridge between God and the people for free and unrestricted access. And that ritual sacrifices that were offered according to the law didn't bring about perfection. And that therefore the whole system was waiting for a better priest and a better sacrifice to deal with sin. And as you can see here now in this text, the author comes full term. So far you have read Hebrews almost as though, is there something wrong with God's covenant with Israel? No, not really. There was nothing wrong with the covenant, but the fault was with the people. As you can read here in the text, he finds fault with them. And then we get into the quotation of Jeremiah chapter 31. This covenant, as it is here telescoped in the quotation from Jeremiah, is failing because of the sinfulness of the people. That's the real reason. And we are stopping here today and take a close look at the author's analysis that comes to us through this Old Testament text that projects the hope of a new and better covenant. So 31, as it is quoted here, telescopes Israel's history under the covenant in 3 brief statements, and each one marks a stage in the history of this covenant. Verse 9, I took them by the hand, that's number 1. Then they did not continue in my covenant. That's number 2. And then, so I showed no concern for them. That's number 3. This is the tale of the inevitable doom of the old covenant. And this is the tale of the fall of the house of Israel. The first stage of this history is Mount Sinai. The full text reads, I made a covenant with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. This is endearing language, isn't it? It's like a father and a little child. God took Israel by the hand and led them out of bondage to himself, as the book of Exodus claimed, to the mountain of God, to Sinai. And the making of the covenant at the mountain was a milestone, nothing short of a milestone in the unfolding plan of redemption. Because God's promises to Abram, first and foremost, included the making of a nation from Abram's descendants. And the exodus from Egypt marked its first grand fulfillment. Israel was a nation, for sure. And they were now a free nation, a nation of free people, no longer slaves. We often fail to appreciate the magnitude of this, the singularity of this migration. To this day, I can assure you, and you can take my word for this on this one, to this day, it remains unparalleled in world history that an entire nation with kid and caboodle moved as one person from here to there. It is a one-of-a-kind signature event. Nothing like it has ever happened. Nothing like it will ever happen again. Not in this world. Oh, there have been migrations of peoples, but they came in stages and in spurts. They came in installments, and they usually took many, many years. Nothing as complete as this has ever been seen. And after only 40 years, and that included a 30-year detour on account of Israel's sin, after 40 years, it was done, finished. And so Israel had become a real nation. And at the foot of the mountain, God constituted them as his holy people, making a covenant, giving them the law, defining their identity as God's people, and describing their proper way of life as his people. And this covenant, as we know, formalized, it shaped Israel's relationship with God. Every major covenant that you can read about in the Bible, Old and New Testament, essentially does the same thing, formalizing a relationship between God and his people. This one did this too, at this stage in the history of redemption. And it was a covenant that, as we know, included the appointment of a priesthood to safeguard the people's approach to God and its elaborate service. All right. But the law of the covenant had not even been delivered into the hands of the people when they flagrantly violated the first and foremost of all commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Think of Roderick Usher. They had barely been saved. They had barely been set free. And now they, like a madman, rush headlong into spiritual suicide. The covenant has not even been written. What a vexing thought. What a dark tale. And may I ask, what spirit of self-destruction possessed them to do this? So we move to the second stage of the covenant history. And this almost reads like an understatement, doesn't it? They did not continue in my covenant. You could say they never began. But they did not continue in my covenant. Moses was high up in the mountain of God, in the presence of God, and the people down in the plain, but they didn't want to wait for Moses or for God. So what do? They fashion a calf of gold under the direction of their first high priest, Aaron. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God into the image of a four-footed beast. And because they apparently believed the narrative that they had now written for themselves, scripted on their own, they believed their narrative. They said, this is God who led us out of Egypt. They then rose up and celebrated their accomplishment. They had a party. And this treacherous apostasy, it was only the start of a 40-year rebellion in which one outreach chased another. And Israel handsomely earned their reputation as a stiff-necked and rebellious people, as God repeatedly called them. And despite the great signs that they had witnessed with their own eyes, they had seen these things, they had heard these things, they refused to trust God. They refused to take God at His word. And if ever there was a people that had no reason to do this, it would have been Israel. They had been so blessed with revelation, visible and audible revelation. And this continued until God said, enough. Enough. I swear by my own name that they will not see the good land that I swore to give to them. And this happened only 2 years after they had left Egypt. At Kadesh Barnea, on the edge of the promised land, where Israel refused to go forward, trusting in the Lord and conquer the land that God would give to them. And from that day on, when God uttered the curse, they will not see the land, but they will perish in the wilderness. Picture this, please. Grasp this. This generation lived under a cloud of doom. They lived under a sentence of death, like Roderick and Madeline. Doomed, destined to wander. And wander some more until they could go no further. And all the graves of that generation, down to the very last one of them, had been dug and filled with their remains. That is a tale of doom. It's a biblical tale, and it's true, not fiction. But God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. God is the God of second chances, third, fourth, and many more. After the children had buried their unbelieving parents, God then took them by the hand again. And God renewed the covenant, or made a new covenant in the plains of Moab. on the edge of the promised land at the end of the 40 years. And the people with whom God covenanted there, they were a new generation. And to them, God gave a new covenant. It was much expanded over Sinai. It was more inclusive. And it was also tailored for a new stage in their relationship. As I said, all covenants were designed to do this, to formalize the relationship at various stages of the existence of the nation. And this one was tailored for life, sedentary life in the promised land, where they would have houses, no longer tents. And there would no longer be semi-nomads wandering in the wilderness, and they would have orchards, and they would have fields to work, and there would be a permanent residence of God in the land, which turned out to be the temple on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. And the covenant of which we speak here is essentially the book of Deuteronomy, the entire book. In it, Moses told the people in so many words, don't be like your parents. Don't repeat their mistakes. Don't. But God also knew that they too would not continue in the covenant. In fact, God said it. One fine day, he said to Moses, I know what these people will do when you are gone. They will rise up and rebel against me. I know it. And you know a thing or two about it too. I think every one of you knows what I'm talking about. When you were young, how often did you say, I ain't gonna be like my mommy. I ain't gonna be like my daddy. I'm gonna chart my own way and it will be better. Never will I be like my parents. Only to find, many years down the road, when you look in the mirror in a moment of truth, you, in many ways, are exactly like your parents because you were cut from the same quarry. Still, because God never leaves himself without witness, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 19 summarizes or condenses this covenant into a single choice and places it and presses it upon the people. Moses wrote there in chapter 30, verse 15, I have set before you. I call heaven and earth to witness against you that I have set before you life and death. It was so evocative of the two-tree scenario in the primeval garden, with which God also implied a basic choice for Adam and Eve. I have placed before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life that you and your offspring may live. Good. A good word. How would they fare? Especially in plain sight of the doom of their own parents, whose graves they had dug with their own hands in the wasteland. How would they fare? Oh, my friends, I can tell you exactly how they fare. They fared like Roderick Usher. Possessed, it would seem, with an imperious death wish. That's how they fared. And the prophet spoke of it all along. Jeremiah 27:13, for example, seeing the writing on the wall and knowing that the exile could no longer be averted, asked this question of the last king of Judah, whose city was already under siege. It was basically all that was left of the kingdom of Judah as the Babylonians were knocking on the gates of the city. And he would ask this question, listen to this: why do you and your people want to die? Why do you and your people want to die? By the sword, by famine, and by pestilence, as the Lord your God has spoken. Why? Ezekiel, just about in the same time frame, echoed this call, saying, cast away from you all your transgressions that you have committed and make yourself a new heart and a new spirit. Why do you want to die, O house of Israel? I have no pleasure in the death of anyone. So, turn, repent, and live. Why do you want to die? That's the question we asked of Madeline and of Roderick of Usher, isn't it? Why? Are you sick? Are you crazy? What possesses you? Why choose death? Why do you want to die? God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. Why do you want to die? You can ask the same question of every one of us who at one point or another was ready to depart and to say, hey, you know, I've had enough. I just want to depart. I just want to go away quietly. And God would say to you, I don't want you to die. Why do you want to die? I want you to live. I want you to repent. Repent of your ways. But Israel would always live with a morbid, spiritual death wish. For Moses had already diagnosed Israel's heart disease as early as in Deuteronomy 29 verse 4. To this day, he said to them, in making a covenant with them, to this day the Lord your God has not given you a heart to understand, eyes to see, or ears to hear. He hasn't. And at this point, brothers and sisters, we've reached a fork in the path. A fork. On one hand, Israel's Old Covenant history, as we have looked at it so far, it almost reads like a failed experiment, like an abortion. But it was written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. It was written for us to learn from. And Israel's death wish, when they were placed, or when the choice was placed before them, life or death, choose life, they would always end up over here. Israel's death wish is on the heart of every sinner under the sun. It's true. Absolutely true, which makes the Old Covenant an exhibition. On a national scale, an exhibition of our human dilemma. Our human dilemma, and prepares the way for Christ. You cannot read the Old Testament and not come away with a sense of urgency by which you throw yourself at God's feet and plead for mercy, because that's all that you are left with. Because nothing has changed. As far as the condition of the human heart is concerned, it is incurable as it ever has been. And no matter who we are or who we think we are, we can only repeat what our parents have done. Yes, lives may take different shapes. And circumstances, they may look different, but it all ends up in the same place. It all comes to the same place, to the same conclusion, the same result. Like Usher, all people have a rendezvous with death, and it's inevitable. It's inevitable because you can't educate, and you can't talk, and you can't covenant sinners out of sin. It does not work. It cannot be done unless God does what he promised to do in the latter days, in a prophecy of Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 6, which anticipates Jeremiah 31. Said God, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live and not die. But this is the one thing that sinners can't do. And the human fall is not complete in the sense that we have not been incapacitated. We can still do a lot of things. In fact, human beings are very savvy and very smart and very skillful in so many ways. God has not withdrawn so many of the great gifts that a human being has been endowed with. And today, in the world in which we live, you can see the arm of humankind growing longer and longer and stronger too, with the help of modern technology. We can do things that previous generations could only dream about, which is also deceiving for us, because we really think that the sky is the limit, that we can work ourselves out of the whole of our own problem. But this, to love God, this is the thing for which we were made. And this is the one thing that sinners can't and will not do, to love God on his terms. Now, I may think I love God, but I only love God on my terms, or I only love God as the God of my imagination. But to love God on his terms, sinners cannot do. That door is shut. It can't be done. It's like some of your purchases. So you unwrap the gadget, and you and your children can't wait to see it up and running and to play with it until you read the fine print on the box, battery not included. And this leads us to the third stage in the covenant history. Number one, God took Israel by the hand. Number two, they did not continue in the covenant. And now number three, so I showed no concern for them. So let me ask you, brothers and sisters, what happens when I harden my heart against God's word? What happens? Well, eventually, God will no longer contend with you. He will leave you to your own choices, to the life that you have chosen. You will be settled in it, and as far as you are concerned with your choices, you will no longer be conformed to the image of Christ. You will no longer be reformed. That's what happens when I harden my heart against God. God will leave me to my own choice, to my own way. And this is the meaning of showing no more concern for them. And again, the prophet spoke of this in multiple ways. Jeremiah chapter 5 verse 3, for example, says, "O Lord, do not your eyes look for truth? And you have struck them down, but they felt no anguish. You have consumed them, but they refuse to take correction. They have made their faces harder than rock. They have refused to repent." So God says, see to yourself. I'll leave you to your own choices. There was nothing more that could have been done for Israel on earth. But they always chose death and kept choosing death because their hearts were stone cold dead. Now, many Christians today believe that God would never leave them in this way. God would never hide his face from me. Well, they don't read the whole Bible. They don't believe that God could possibly leave them alone for a period of time. As I said, they don't read the whole Bible. There is a theme that runs from the Old into the New Testament, and it climaxes on the cross that is sometimes called the silence or the absence of God, according to which God leaves even believers to their own devices when they refuse to repent. And they become hardened, and so he leaves them to their choices because he knows that they will not turn until they have tasted the bitterness of their own sinful choices. And of course, you can see these choices on display on the cross of Jesus, where the cry of dereliction, my God, why have you forsaken me?" was heard. There was silence on the airways, and a lot more than that. But there was silence. And if that was true of the Son of God who hung there, God can and God does sometimes deliver us up to our own choices. Hosea 5:15 puts it this way, after exhorting the people to return to him, and they hardened their hearts. God says, "I will return to my place." That's God's way of saying, I'm going to go home and I'm going to leave them alone. I will return to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face, and in their distress earnestly seek me. Sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better. God knows this. And so Isaiah 6:9 had predicted that Israel as a nation, notwithstanding a faithful remnant within the nation, Israel on the whole remained obtuse. As the prophet puts it in Isaiah 6, hearing but not understanding, because God wouldn't give it to them. He would give them up to their own way. Seeing but not perceiving, until the coming of Christ and his making of a new and better covenant, which is up for Easter Sunday next week. Because God's people would indeed seek God. They would come to God. Because it is God who keeps word. But I have learned, and I'm sure that you have too, you don't ever take God's grace for granted if you are bent on going your own way. Don't take it for granted. And brothers and sisters, that's the legacy of the Old Covenant. A people with a death wish. A people with a death wish. It's for us to see and take to heart. Because if you have been enlightened by the Spirit, and if you know your own burden, the burden of your own sinfulness, you know that what you need is not multiple baptisms, or another profession of faith because the first one didn't go far enough or didn't last long enough. And you don't need one more commitment to try harder, but this time make it work, make it count. And you don't need to read books of self-help and recovery. You don't need to attend seminars of one kind or another. You don't need to read books of successful Christian living and 5 easy steps or anger management. before you need anything else, before I need anything else, you need grace. You need grace. And you also know that this gospel of grace is offensive. And I would dare say, not even so much because this gospel does teach people that we are sinners. There are enough people who are clear-sighted enough in this world. There are also cynics who fully understand that there is something wrong with us. Not with the animals, not with the planet, with us. They understand that. So the real offense of the gospel is not even that it says, hey, you are a sinner. How do you like that? The offense of the gospel is that it leaves you only with one way out. Grace, grace, grace. Nothing else. And that's offensive. It stinks to sinners. And you know why? Because sinners do think that they really can make better choices than Mr. and Mrs. Usher and the house of Israel. Well, none of us can. Because left to ourselves, we are lost already. Every one of you who are here today, you are lost already. And we do get lost in our own devices, in our own way of thinking, in our choices, in a life that always tends to death, because there are 1,001 ways in this world that are touted in one way or another, advertised in one way or another, that lead you away from God and therefore end up in death. The human race lives with a death wish and is therefore not so much different than Roderick and Madeleine Usher, and certainly not much different, if at all, from the house of Israel. We need a new heart. We really do. We need a new heart. And this is what Jesus gives. This is what the new covenant promises to give. A new day, a new beginning, a new heart that knows God, about which we will speak this afternoon. To know God and to love His Word. And every Christian who has such a heart desires it, desires more of the same. And as a Christian, you may walk in darkness because God has given you up to your choices. You cannot remain there. And out there, on this board, message board, on La Mirada Boulevard, you see the message of Hosea 10:12. It is time to seek the Lord. It's time. Every day. And it is time to seek the Lord, that He may come and rain righteousness on you. The rain has come, because we also have a priest who has come from heaven. A priest who brings us to God, God to us. And the rain has fallen because this priest has also caused the Holy Spirit to rain on us, to wash us clean for righteousness, for a new life, for a new beginning. And if you feel that you've gone too far, every day is a new beginning for you who believe. That is what the new covenant, that is what the gospel affords. And every Sunday we celebrate the supper. And many of you are familiar with these words, which is a good thing, by the way. You don't reinvent your life every day, do you? You go through a routine. That's the way God made it to be. So also in worship. So we repeat many things for our good. And the words are, this is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. But these are words of priestly mediation. Why? Because only priests deal in blood to bring people to God, God to the people. And therefore, blood of the new covenant answers God's call and demand for absolute justice, and poured out for many answers our need for forgiveness and cleansing of the heart. All questions are answered. And that's why Christ chose death. Christ came with a death wish, not like Roderick Usher or the house of Israel or any one of us as sinners. Christ came with a death wish. Christ chose death so that you might live. Before you could make any choice of your own, He has made the choice for you, and His will for you is eternal life. Therefore, He says to us today, now choose life. And know that the choice is now yours in Him who made you free for this, to choose life. Sin and darkness ought not to reign in you, because you are not the house of Usher. You are the house of God, built on an eternal foundation that has no crack. Let's pray. We thank you, Father, for a new covenant, which we will learn more about next week. We also recognize how incapable we are in and of ourselves to do any good, to procure your favor. And once again, we love your grace that comes to us completely free, without any strings attached to it. And it comes to us in our greatest distress. To a people, like all people, who left to themselves live with a death wish, a spiritual death wish, but no longer. We can choose life. And I pray, Lord, that you would give each and every one of us such a heart, and to desire more of Christ, to gain Him, and to continue to learn from Him. All these things we pray in His name.